Hello, Bianca. Thank you for coming today. We are on C.HR with Ariaunstewart, and we have Bianca with Woke Women's Work. So today we are going to be talking to her about her business, what she does for her career. So first of all, can you tell us just about yourself and what you do?
So my name is Bianca Charles. Currently, I work at Phoenix Charter Academy in administration as an instructional leadership coach. But prior to that, I taught English language arts and various reading and writing courses to middle and high school students in Detroit. And so from there, I ended up deciding that I wanted to go into administration within the school system, and ended up landing a position here in Springfield, my hometown. And so now I'm back home. I've been working here since last summer.
Awesome. And how do you like being back home, being back in Springfield?
Yeah, it's really nice to be, with old high school friends and family.
Yeah.
And just being able to do this work in the community that, birthed me, so.
Awesome. So I met Bianca when I went to your event, and it was a Woke Women's Work event. We did vision boards. We talked about planning for year 2021, which I think was very much needed to just get out of the house after everything that's been going on, connect with people, and just kind of formulate what you want to do next. So can you tell me what made you want to start doing those separate, those groups that you were doing, getting people together?
So while working in Detroit, Detroit just in general is about 85% black. So the school system, most of the employees are black, very much black women.
Yeah.
But one thing I noticed is that most of the black women that were working in the school system were in entry-level positions. So they'd often be the teachers, or other support, educational staff members, but not so much taking the roles of the instructional leaders or the administrators or the principals, or even those at that superintendent level.
Yeah.
And so that often bothered me. And so when we look at minorities within the workplace, especially in the school system, we often see lots of white women working in predominantly black and brown schools. Of course, men in general are hard to come across. So when black men take an interest in education, they're often given positions. But what I noticed is that oftentimes white women and black men, they would be on an upward trajectory. They would be able to come in an entry level and quickly move up the ladder to becoming principal or superintendent and things of that nature. White women as well. But then I noticed that a lot of black women that I worked with had worked 10, 15, 20 years within the school system and still were not given opportunities to get out of the classroom and become maybe an instructional coach or the dean of culture or principal. And I noticed that when they did have to spend so much more time getting there.
To get to that position,
And oftentimes they would be way more qualified. So I've seen a lot of people come into the school system without any experience in education or any experience teaching, and continuously be on that upward trajectory, and see black women not given the opportunity. And so I wanted to make sure that black women who are at the forefront of educating, especially black and brown kids, were given those opportunities in education, but then also looking at it in terms of all career pathways.
So what do you think was when you talk to more people, trying to help people get to the next level, how do you help them kind of break the glass ceiling?
So there's first, I guess one thing that I've noticed is sometimes people want to get somewhere but don't know exactly how to get there. They may not possess all the skills they want, because oftentimes when you're looking for a job, it's you need work experience that I don't have, but I want to get to that next level.
Yeah.
So one of the ways, first we think about, is this something that interests you? So connecting with people who do that work that you might want to take part in, observing them, volunteering if you can. But also thinking about how can, even without having that job, how can I get that experience? So, for example, I knew I wanted to go into educational leadership, but at first that opportunity wasn't available for me. And so during like my grad programs and just my off time, I would meet with teachers and provide instructional support with how to use technology efficiently in the classroom, or how to make things more culturally relevant. And this is things I was just doing on my own time, but it helped me like build my resume, because they are things that I did professionally to support others. And so when I knew I wanted a position that would ultimately encompass training teachers, I had that experience because I did that in my downtime. I utilized my grad program to use those opportunities.
Learn all those other things. Yeah.
And so
that's awesome. So I think that's really cool, because like a lot of what I do at work right now too, and community wise, is kind of like is building that diverse demographic to be prepared for that next step. And I agree with you. Sometimes you see people who, if they're not even more experienced, at least equally as experienced as their counterparts, not getting the same opportunities. And then I also feel like on top of like getting that experience and putting it on your resume, it's also about like networking, because you know, people tend to want to work with who looks like them, or who they connect with, or they're like, oh, I know I could hang out with you, so I'm gonna hire you. You know what I mean? And we're gonna have that like that culture here. So what would you say to like a new teacher going into, let's say, like a predominantly like white school, but they still want to be able to grow, they want to eventually be like principal of the school, or maybe even superintendent, and they're starting out their career, you know, they went to school, like how would you what tips would you give them as they're starting out?
Yeah, I 100% agree with the networking aspect is something that's just undervalued. And so building those relationships with those who have ultimately the power in the school. And in schools, and actually in any workplace, people navigate to certain people, and when you see those people are holding, you know, the clout in the community, you have to take advantage of that and get to know those people more. So if you notice that a lot of people, like maybe the vice principal's been there the longest, maybe even longer than the principal, and if they do happy hour, or they like to go bowling, or they do outside of work, you know, staff events, getting involved in that, and getting to know those people, finding connecting interests, just having conversations, spending your lunches talking to them, so that you can build that relationship, seeking mentorship from those people as well to learn how they got where they're at. That really helps get like you to that next
relationships. And I feel like even from a leadership standpoint too, like I know at some companies I've been at, they will do a lot of community service, and it's like kind of like an extra pat on the back in your job if you're volunteering a certain amount of hours. And I did like that, because it kind of allows you to do something you're already interested in, because you have like there's so many different things that you could help out with, and then also connect with people, like, you know, you love animals, you guys both do the animal shelter thing, or you want to help out like an orphanage or something, like whatever it is, it kind of helps you like go a little bit deeper. And then I know you were telling me before that you guys started something at work, like groups that you're communicating in. What was the name of the group again?
Affinity Groups.
Affinity Group. Okay.
It's interesting because I actually partnered with the Department of Child and Family Services through a friend, through networking, and I did an anti-bias training for them, where we talked about, you know, stereotyping and assumptions made within social services, and how that impacts children and families, and how to dismantle those. And so that kind of lived out in the work I do now. So we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, and we're partnering with this organization called One Tilt, where we have affinity groups. And ultimately the affinity groups are race-based, based on what you identify as. So we have like a Black affinity group, an Asian American affinity group, a Latinx affinity group, a white affinity group. And some people are like, why would you separate everyone based on demographic or cultural background or race? But it allows people to sit in a space where they can speak freely and authentically about their experience without their experience being invalidated, or feeling like they have to constantly try to prove that this is what they're experiencing. So when I'm in a space with all Black people and I'm like, this happened to me, there's no question about it. There's no complete shock. It's like we've often shared that same experience in one facet or another. But in those groups, we're really thinking about how can we use the power that we do have and our experiences to encourage our school community to make changes that better support us. And really think about the systems within our community that perpetuate white supremacy. That, our school says we're about this mission, but how can we make sure we're living it out 100%, not just for our kids, but also for the adults in our building as well. Exactly.
I feel like sometimes it's hard to take that conversation and put it into action. So I feel like the only way, and now I think school and education is probably completely different, just like government is different, just like, corporate is different. But I know from my experiences, the only way you really get people to commit to change in like a corporate setting is usually like hitting their pockets. Like, this is going to help us because, this is important to the community that you're in. More people are going to shop with you if you care about these things. How do you do that in education? How do you convey that message and get leadership and decision makers to really care about what everybody's saying?
Honestly, it's really hard, and I think because it's such a high level of work, we also have to be real about what organizations we work in and how many people can we influence to do the work, because we can't do it by ourselves. One good example of like hitting their pockets or like us coming together as a community is when it was either my first or second year in Detroit. We were teaching, and the school district said that they ran out of money to pay the teachers. Like, they were like, after March, whatever, we don't have any money to pay you. And so the teachers are like, how are you just not going to pay us? Like, right? Like, we have kids and families, so how's that going to work? And so, but there were some stipulations about like striking to a certain extent. So we're like, how can we hold them accountable? And ultimately, what we ended up doing on multiple occasions is a district-wide call out. So teachers were calling sick. So there's like 40,000 students that are serviced in the school community. So it was a big deal. But so what we would do is we would plan accordingly, like this many people are going to call in sick. And if this many people are calling sick, the schools have to get shut down. They tried to give some pushback because they were like, oh, well, that's not right. You're not doing right by the kids and da-da-da. But again, these people also have to make a living and take care of their families, right? And we did this many times, like maybe 3, 4, 5 times, where the school was just shut down for the day because everybody in the district came together and we called in sick, and there was they couldn't really do much about that. Like, they couldn't force us not to. And then they found the money to pay us. They did.
Are you serious?
Yeah, they found the money. They found a way to pay us.
And that's what you guys probably knew the whole time. You were like, nah, they got the money somewhere. We just had to push them to... They really thought that they were going to say, we can't pay you guys, and you guys are just going to
like,
keep going to work like nothing happened.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But that's one way, like, of protesting. But then also, like, thinking about where you work. Like, I'm really grateful to work where I work because... we do intentionally have like an HR department and those up top that really work to try to ensure that our community is represented in many different positions. And that if we, like, those conversations, if we bring it up enough, there are changes. So like this year they adjusted the pay salary for teachers. They have an initiative to make sure that they hire a certain number, like that our staff is more reflective of our student community versus, what most of the schools are run by, white women and, some white men there. But so we really try to push, but our staff does hear our teachers more than any probably other school I've seen in the past.
That's awesome.
That's really we really push, those up top, and we have those conversations. Like, we argue, like, me and my principal, he's really open where, like, I can tell him what I really think, and there's no fear of, like, I'm going to be fired, because we're
Yeah.
really trying to do what's best for everyone.
And that's so important too. You just made me think of so many different things, so I gotta like formulate what I want to go ahead next. But I think that's important too for like leadership. The fact that you have somebody that's, you know, that's your principal that you can communicate with. I feel like that comes from them knowing that you are good at your job, that you're bringing something to the table, and also respecting that you're the person actually working with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I feel like that's in every industry, whoever's actually like interacting with, not that kids are customers, but I guess like in a school setting compared to like retail or another business, they're the customer, right? Like you're trying to do the best service for them. So actually listening to the people who are working with them one-on-one is super important. So you said, I want to go back to what you said about like you couldn't strike at the school. Is that a thing when you work as a teacher? You guys aren't allowed to strike? Is that like...
Well, it depends on like the agreements of the school. So like in public schools, often they have a union, but there might be certain rules or, you know, promises the union has made to the school that are negotiated. But then in charters, it can be a lot different. So at charter schools, most employees are at will. So you can be fired without reason. And you can also quit without reason any time. So it makes things a little bit complicated. I've worked in public schools and in charters. So I see the pros and the cons to both. But yeah, it really just depends.
Because I've had, you know, being in HR, our conversation with unions is like almost always negative, because a union coming in pretty much means that we're not doing our job. Like if you need, because pretty much you're supposed to have, so like from an HR standpoint, you're supposed to have your heads of leadership, the people who are mainly working, who would be the teachers, and then you got like the principals, and then your HR team is supposed to be like that third party who's supposed to be like standing outside of it, and an advocate for the employee. Most importantly, HR, it's the employee is the most important person. So it's like when a union comes in, that means that you haven't really done your job in HR to facilitate conversations. Employees feel like they need to bring in another third party. So, and then I know from the experience I've had, like, you know, unions will take a certain amount of money out of the check. Obviously, you got to pay them. So are you saying from your experience, or, like, you preferred unions, you preferred being at the charter, or is it kind of like pros and cons of both?
There's pros and cons. So I think one thing that I did appreciate about the union is, honestly, you couldn't be fired over pettiness. Like, because the charter can fire you anytime, like, you could get fired because someone just doesn't like you, or that you spoke up about an issue. It's much harder to get, you know, to lose a position unless you're really not doing your job well.
And they got to prove it.
They have to actually prove it. But then also when you think about funding, so a lot of charters can take private funds from certain entities, while the public schools not so much. So sometimes the charters do get more funding. So they might pay teachers higher salaries or offer more bonuses. And so it makes things complex, because of course our teachers, our staff still have to make a living. But then they also want to be protected. And so it can be hard. And having resources, you know, like I worked at schools when I was in Detroit, like the ceiling would leak. And no one would come do anything, or we might have some type of, you know, insects in the building, and they wouldn't do a proper cleaning of the school. But then I also worked at charters in Detroit, or some of the highest performing Detroit public schools. The quality, the conditions there would be much different, whether it was like they were unionized or not. So it really depends. Like one of the charters I worked at, like they just got like $1 million donation from I think someone in the NBA. So
that's awesome. So that was a charter school. A public school wouldn't have been able to take a donation like that?
So it does depend on like the city and the state.
Okay.
But there's just more rules for the money that public schools can accept.
Oh, okay.
There's a little more flexibility for the charters.
Got you. I didn't know that. Thank you. That was, that's really informative. And I feel like that, I mean, obviously, like, if you get more merit-based and you can get, like, bonuses and stuff like that, I do feel like that kind of pushes people to go above and beyond versus, like, you know, my job's protected, but then it's, like, you know, double-edged sword.
Yeah, but then it can be taken at any time, you know?
That's true. That's very true. So I did want to talk a little bit more about Woke Women's Work. So that's your brand that you have like outside of everything you do, but it seems like you've taken everything you've learned and put into it. I know that, you facilitate conversations with people as far as like, I know you talked about like diversity and inclusion before in different meetings, and also resume building and writing. Can you take us through like if someone wants to sit with you for a consultation or get their resume done, like what that looks like?
Yeah, so more often than not, a lot of people do like to work one-on-one. And so I ask them to send me what they have so far. So whether it's a resume, a partially completed job application, or a college app, whatever the case may be. More often it's resumes or cover letters. And I do start a revision process of making before I even meet one-on-one with the client, making the resume more accomplished based versus just like the tasks that they complete at their job, thinking about what were the outcomes of the work that you did. And then when I meet with them, I choose to always meet with them because oftentimes when you talk to them, they've done more than what they've
put
shown.
on paper.
Versus like on their resume, they're just like, these are the job descriptions that were outlined when I applied.
I feel like they just like people copy and paste it, put it on their resume.
Yeah. Versus like when you talk to them, you hear so many different things that they've accomplished that I'm like, you need to put that on your resume. Like you were able to make this happen. Or I remember one woman I was working with. She's done like photography and like marketing and things of that nature, and she was telling me how she developed she did research to try to highlight Black and brown voices that were unheard of, like unsung heroes, and she helped develop like a short film for a channel about that. And I'm like, how come this is not on here?
Yeah, are you kidding me?
Like, you want a job in, photography or videography?
So was her field photography, videography? Was she trying to get like a graphic designer job or something like that?
So it was, her background was like videography, photography, and like social media, like markeking type stuff,
And she was trying to get a job in that field, and she left that.
So it'd be huge things. Like, it's huge things. I'm like, this is a big deal. Like, you should mention this.
And I feel like from an HR perspective, and it's so exciting working with or talking to somebody who's like in this stuff too. Yeah, exactly. It's
like when you read them, you're like,
But like, because from the HR side, when we write like job descriptions, for instance, my company that I'm at right now, we did a review of like core competencies. So it's like, okay, this is what we say the job is, but has anyone who's actually done this job had anything to do with the job description? Or was it like written in HR, reviewed by a manager who hasn't done this job in 15 years? So we did, we figured out what the core competencies were, which is like breaking like little tasks down. Like say, you're a cashier, but you actually, you help in the back with inventory all the time too, and you're picking up the slack on other areas. That's something that should be in the job description because it's a real part of the job, and it affects how much money you're getting to do that job. And sometimes like people, and I'm sure you've done this too, where it's like your job says one thing, but you do
everything
a million things. And it's like, I think that's kind of just like naturally part of it, especially when you're trying to grow in your job, you're going to pick up more work. But to a degree, it should be accounted for because you shouldn't be overworking and underpaid, you know? So I feel like that, what you're saying is the flip side of that, where it's like, okay, I've been working this job all these years.
But I've been doing more than just what was on that job description, more often than not.
And I love that you were saying too, like accomplishments. Like I would tell people sometimes, I'll have job resumes for certain jobs that I look at, and I'm like, man, this person like sounds like almost it, but the way they wrote their resume is just off. And I know that the manager is going to look at it and be like, So sometimes I'll even like call people and be like, hey, like let me talk to you. Let me hear how you sound. And then I'll say, can you rewrite your resume? Like, oh, you just said like a bunch of great stuff. Can you put that on paper, please? Like especially like if you have a job in sales, or even with, what you're doing with Woke Women's Work, if somebody went and did a seminar with you, for instance, that's something they could put on their resume.
Exactly. And I think it's like people often don't realize, like, you don't want your resume to be a copy and paste. So, like, if someone else who's done a similar job can literally copy and paste what you wrote on theirs, then it's probably not really highlighting your individual accomplishments. And so that's how I try to think about it. Like, one time, I did this fundraiser online that only just involved me, like, posting on social media, and I raised like $2,000 to $3,000 for school supplies for students. So on my resume, I'm not just gonna say like collected money or raised money. I'm gonna say provided this many amount of resources to students through collecting monetary or raising monetary donations of this amount. Because the result is that students were being provided with those resources.
And oh my gosh, fundraising is so hard.
It is.
I'm doing like fundraising for campaigns right now. I'm just like, oh my god. It's so weird because it's like you have a great cause and you're doing it for the students. It doesn't get any better of a cause than that, but it's still like at the end of the day, you're still trying to get people to put their money in, and getting people to separate from their money is like
I know, it's hard.
It's tough stuff. So yeah, no, that's amazing, and you can bring that to anything. Like somebody could take, if they had done fundraising, like volunteer wise, even for like a campaign or something, you could bring that into a sales position if you wanted to.
And being able to target your resume for your position, because like although I've worked in education, when I apply for teaching jobs, my resume looks like my interactions with students more so, like my ability to analyze data to support students. But when I apply for leadership positions like the one I'm in now, it's my interactions with other educators and how I've supported them. But I also have a background in ed tech, so when I apply for that, it's all about using technology with kids, using technology and data with adults. And so being able to use the same positions to highlight different aspects of your job is important.
I just have to say my favorite public speakers in the community and all around have always been educators. Like I feel like you guys just have a different way of communicating and like connecting with your audience. Like anytime I'm in a presentation, I was thinking of the ethnic study. I know Sim, like I was going to their first presentation that they did, and she was kind of getting everybody's attention in the room. I was like, oh my gosh, like teachers you guys just have like we
have to engage kids. Engaging kids is hard.
It's like the hardest thing you can do.
And when we go to some presentations, we're like, oh my gosh, I could make this so much more engaging. Like we think about that all the time, and sometimes people in education will do boring presentations for us, and we're like, I know you didn't bring this boring presentation. I was like, everything you told me I couldn't do in my classroom.
Right.
That's what you're doing.
Exactly.
So.
No, I think that's awesome, because that element too, and just to all the viewers, like educators are the ones to learn from. If you don't know how to give a good presentation, if you don't know how to engage, watch the educators around you. Trust me, because I feel like when you're working with kids, you have to work with someone who has like a short attention span. They're like, you got your kids who are excited about class, and then majority of the kids are like, ugh, I gotta just get this done. So it's like, I feel like even adults, even as we're doing things that we know we have to do, sometimes you're in a position where you're just like, I just gotta get this done. So it's like awesome to be able to engage and like come up with different ideas for stuff like that. So that's awesome. I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you, Bianca, for coming out and being on the show today. Bianca runs Woke Women's Work. Make sure you check it out. Can you let them know where they can find you?
You can find me on Facebook at Woke Women's Work. And then you can also email me, Bianca Charles, the E in Charles is the number 3, @gmail.com.
Awesome. So you can definitely reach out to her if you need help like in your current career, if you need help with your resumes, if you need someone to facilitate conversations for you, she's the person to go to. I also want to say thank you to the Association of Black Business and Professionals. They sponsor C.HR. They are a great organization that allows different Black-owned businesses, business owners, and workers of all types to come together and network and build. Thank you guys so much for listening.